When it emerged the Duke of Sussex was creating a documentary with Netflix that was released today about the Invictus Games, it may have suggested some sort of a turning point. And I think it's very hopeful for the Duke. The Invictus Games were founded by him in 2014 after being inspired by the Warrior Games in the United States. The institution has been an enormous help to countless servicemen across the world who have been wounded when serving their countries. But as David Starkey has pointed out, the great overarching point of the Invictus Games is that in spite of some of the most brutal setbacks one could imagine, participants admirably overcome their hardship. Indeed, Invictus itself means unconquerable or undefeated. I think it's the motto of Kent. So will the Duke adopt this mentality himself, learning from his fellow veterans, rather than wallowing in victimhood? And will this restore him, which I think we would all like, to the affections of the British people? Still with me is my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Kelvin, this is just the sort of thing that a Royal Duke should be doing, making programmes about those who've served their country and have recovered through very tough times. I think there's a huge desire in this country to like Prince Harry. I don't think that's gone away. I may just be a sentimental monarchist, but I don't think it's gone away. And if he does things like this, isn't there a chance that actually his popularity will revive and people will forget about the last couple of years?
I think the way for his popularity to be revived would be, of course, if he actually ended his marriage and headed back over here, to be honest. I don't think there's a lot of chance. I do agree with you, doing this kind of stuff, anybody doing it, honestly, it's such a great thing. But then, when he had the opportunity to PR it, he talked about how he was left in a kind of fetal position, lying on the floor, recovering from his second tour of Afghanistan. And I think he always has to make it about him. And I think that is part of the royal family, which he has lost, right? The royal family grit their teeth and just get on with it, no matter how painful.
I read that bit that Kelvin read about how he responded afterwards. But that actually made me feel sympathetic to him, that I've never been out to fight for my country. I've never seen my close friends being blown to pieces as I've had a job to do for the state. I can understand that that is mentally enormously draining, and that when you come back, you do need a degree of support.
Well, can I just say, when I read that interview with absolute horror and also a degree of anger, and certainly it's almost disgust. Look, I know a lot of people who are in Optelic, who are in Helmand, who came back, who didn't have homes to go to, they didn't have financial security, they didn't have a family to actually return to. There are people who end up on the streets in many cases. We treat our armed forces appallingly in this country, and yet he's now said that he is suffering, he's the victim here, when he had more, in one day of his income, more than all of the rest put together for a year.
But it made me angry. The Invictus Games, isn't he doing
something? Oh, no, I don't take that away from him.
He's doing something to help people less fortunate than him.
Jacob, I don't take that away from him.
But by talking about his own experience, he makes it more immediate, more understandable.
Well, I'm sorry, I think the reaction amongst a lot of the people in the ex-forces community will be, we had to grin and bear it, we had to have a stiff upper lip, we had to actually make our own way. We didn't have palaces, we didn't have all these funds, we didn't have the publicity, and yet there he is, talking as if he's the only person in the world who's weeping.
One of the issues our country faces, and it is complete, and I've lived in the United States, one completely different, is there is a warmth and an embracing by politicians. By politicians.
Thank you for your service.
Right, and thank you, and raising money. And I remember this about 3 years ago, I saw a soldier dressed in his fatigues walking across Waterloo Station. I had never seen that. I've been going to Waterloo Station for 30 bloody years. Right?
Well, it wasn't allowed because of the IRA.
It
wasn't allowed. Yes.
Right, yes, hold on a second. This was 3 years ago.
I know.
We did have a Good Friday Accord some years ago. I'm sure you remember
1998.
that. Right, so I almost welled up at seeing this guy walking across there. We do not care. Now, I admire Harry because at least he's found a role for himself, right? But it's a role which is conducted with some kind of PR about himself and everything. I hate that about him. So I disagree fundamentally with your argument. You said I felt warm towards
But if you want to do anything political or charitable. You have to get publicity for it. You can't just be a shrinking violet.
He gets publicity doing his shoes up, Jacob. He doesn't need to worry about that.
He's got Oprah Winfrey on speed dial, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Who's he got on speed dial?
Oprah Winfrey on speed dial, you know.
Yes, but this is something.
And you see the size of her audience.
But from what both of you are saying, we don't look after our veterans well enough, in spite of great efforts.
Well, explain to me why that is, though, Jacob. As a politician, explain to me why it is that we don't have morning, noon and now. Why Rishi or Starmer, these people, so there's something about being a soldier or a sailor or an airman which seems to push you to the side of society.
I actually think we've been making great efforts in recent years. I think
the Armed Forces
Iraq
Covenant
and Afghanistan brought it home to people how dependent we were on our armed forces, and that it has improved, and that Remembrance Sunday is much better attended than it was. It had been.
I get that's absolutely true. But never forget, the old Kipling. It's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out the brute. But it's saviour of the country when the guns begin to shoot, and that was as true today as it was then. But look, I think it's not just the ex-forces and the people, the veterans. It's also the serving people who live in appalling conditions. Imagine if we'd actually put some of the asylum seekers in the accommodation that we have for our armed forces, then the solids would hit the fan.
Well, that actually happened, and there were complaints about it. Admittedly, there were camps that were used for a few days rather than ones they were expected to live in for a long time.
So what does that say, Jacob? What does that say?
I think we are agreed that we should look after our armed services better. We're perhaps not entirely agreed about His Royal Highness's
a period of
revitalisation of his reputation.